The neon sign hummed above the window as Kelly stared at her plate, the diner's cheap coffee cooling in front of her. She wasn't just eating. She was running through the tactical map of the Ozarks in her head. She was thinking about the reports Vance had pulled up, the missing campers and the territorial shifts. Under the table, the heavy, warm weight of Ashti's head rested on her boot. The Kangal was a silent, living mountain, her breathing steady, but her ears twitching every time the door opened. Then the bell chimed, and Marcus Miller walked in. He looked like he'd just stepped off a movie set, his hair perfectly gelled and a designer hiking jacket that had never seen a speck of dirt. He didn't wait for an invite. He slid into the booth, across from her, his grin gleaming with fake sincerity. "Kelly, I heard you were in town," Marcus said, his voice loud and full of practiced charm. "I had to come see if the rumors were true, the famous dog lady in the flesh." Kelly didn't look up from her steak. "You're interrupting my dinner, Marcus. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Now, don't be like that." He chuckled, leaning his elbows on the table, encroaching on her space. "I'm filming the finale for Beyond the Veil up in the Ozarks. It's the big one. We're going right into the heart of dogman country. My crew is a little jumpy, and I figured, who better to hire for some security? You and your dogs just stand in the background, look rugged for the lens, and keep the bad things at bay. It's an easy paycheck." Kelly finally set her fork down with a sharp clack. "First off, my units are not bodyguards. They are a tactical team. We don't stand around for pictures. Tactical, security, whatever you want to call it," Marcus said, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm offering you a lot of money to bring your friends and play protector for a few days. Think of the exposure. Your business would blow up." "They aren't my friends, Marcus. They're operators, and you really don't get it, do you?" Kelly's voice went flat and dangerous. "You're talking about taking a film crew into a hot zone. Real people are disappearing up there. This isn't a show. It's a slaughterhouse." Marcus leaned back, his smirk never wavering. "Come on, Kelly. Danger is what we do. It makes great for TV. Name a price. 50 grand? 60? You don't have enough money," Kelly said, her eyes boring into his. "I'm telling you no. And if you have any sense at all, you won't go up there. It isn't worth losing your crew, your stars, or your guests. If you go, their blood is on your hands. You'll be the one responsible." Marcus let out a short, cheesy laugh. "Responsible? We've got waivers, sweetheart. It's just a job." Kelly stood up, and Ashti rose with her in one fluid, massive motion. The table rattled as the Kangal's shoulders cleared the height of the booth. "Really? You don't get it. You're fooling with something you cannot control," Kelly said, looking down at him. "If you do go up there, you better be well armed. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned and walked toward the door. Ashti's footsteps, a heavy, rhythmic thud beside her. Vance sat in the back of the armored van, his face bathed in the sterile blue light of a dozen screens. The air in the cramped space was cool and smelled of ozone and electronics. On the primary monitor, the thermal feed from the high-altitude drone was a wash of grays and blacks, tracking the cold stillness of the Missouri woods. Suddenly, a cluster of white, hot signatures flared on the edge of the screen. "What the..." Vance leaned in, his glasses reflecting the glowing data. At first, he couldn't make sense of it. They were massive heat signatures, way too hot and dense for any animal, even a Bigfoot. They looked like glowing, hot blobs moving slowly through the dense canopy. He adjusted the gain on the sensors, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Is that metal?" he whispered to himself. He watched, mesmerized and confused, as the signatures crawled along the old logging trail. As they finally broke through the heavy tree line and into the clearing of Grid 4, the shapes sharpened. The thermal blobs resolved into the hard, square lines of massive vehicles. Vance's jaw dropped. "The fuck is this?" He toggled the optical camera, zooming in until the high-def lens cut through the dark. On the screen, 3 massive, blacked-out production trucks were rumbling into the clearing, followed by a van with a satellite dish on top. He saw men in tactical gear that looked like it came from a costume shop jumping out, shouting and pointing at the woods with bright flashlights. He slapped his headset on, his face turning a dark shade of red. He had no clue Kelly'd spoken with these idiots. To him, this was a catastrophic security breach in the middle of a war zone. He keyed the mic, his voice exploding into Kelly's ear. "Kelly, tell me you're seeing this. I've got a full-scale invasion in Grid 4. 3 trucks, a satellite van, and about a dozen civilians with flashlights. Who the hell are these people, and how did they get past the perimeter?" He didn't wait for her to answer, his eyes darting to the EKG monitors for the dogs. "They're setting up lights. Kelly, they're ringing the dinner bell. Do you copy? What the hell is going on?" Despite Vance screaming in her ear and the dogs practically vibrating with the urge to hunt, Kelly stays ice cold. She doesn't rush, and she doesn't panic. She just unclips her radio and speaks in a voice that sounds like a calm day in a graveyard. "Vance, breath, I know who these guys are," she says, her tone flat. "Just keep your eyes on the tree line. Don't let the dogs break." She steps out from the shadows of the oaks, her hand resting casually on Ashti's collar. More to keep the dog grounded than to hold her back as she walks into the glare of the production lights. Marcus is standing there, hands on his hips like he owns the mountains, shouting directions at a cameraman. He spots her, and his grin returns, wider and more arrogant than in the diner. "See? I told you I'd find the spot. Perfect atmosphere, right?" Kelly doesn't smile back. She stops 10 feet away, the light catching the tactical gear she's wearing. The real kind, not shiny stuff his crew has on. "You're real flirting with death here, Marcus," she says, her voice cutting through the noise of the generator. "I told you, in the restaurant, and I'm telling you now, you cannot be in this area. This is a highly classified zone. You are standing in the middle of an active operation." Marcus just chuckles, looking around at the dark woods. "Classified? Come on, Kelly. This is public land. And besides, look at all this gear. We've got more lights than a stadium. Nothing is coming near us." Kelly looks past him, her eyes scanning the dark edge where the light dies. She knows what Vance is seeing on the thermal. "You think the lights protect you? You're just making it easier for them to pick which one of you to take first." Marcus just chuckled a dismissive sound that didn't reach his eyes. He looked around at the wall of dark timber, then back at the towering banks of production lights they were clicking on. Public land, Kelly National Forest. You can't exactly fence off the great outdoors, can you? And besides, look at these lights. Nothing is going to step into a sun-bleached clearing like this. We've got the perimeter covered. Kelly stepped closer, her face hardened like flint. Not tonight. It isn't. This is an active operation, Marcus. It's restricted. I can. Either call the feds, and they can come drag you out of here in zip ties, or I can just pull my teams back and leave you out here to die. And I'm not fucking joking, Marcus. Which is it going to be? Marcu's smirk finally faltered, a flicker of genuine disappointment crossing his face. He looked at her, then at the massive, silent shape of Ashti at her side. For a second, the weight of the silence in the woods seems to actually hit him, but then he let out a frustrated huff and rolled his eyes. You're really committed to the tough girl bit, aren't you? Fine, fine. We'll keep it on the edge of the clearing. He turned his back on her, completely ignoring the ultimatum. Hey, Jerry, get the B cam on that tripod. I want the tree line in that shot. We're losing the mist. He walked away, waving his arms and shouting orders to his crew as they continued to drag heavy cables across the dirt. He was back in his own world, convinced that the noise and the light made him untouchable. Back in the van, Vance was watching it all go down on the monitors. He saw Marcus walk away and his jaw tightened. He tapped his mic. Kelly! Vance's voice was a low, urgent rasp. He's not moving. He's digging in, and I've got 4 massive heat signatures closing the gap on the north side. They're moving in a pincer formation. They aren't scared of his lights, Kelly. They're using them to see their targets. The back door of the armored van slammed against the frame with a metallic bang that echoed through the clearing. Vance didn't just walk. He sprinted towards Marcus. His face beet red and a ruggedized tablet gripped in his. Hand like a weapon. Shut it down! Shut the fuck down! Right now! He screamed, his voice crackling with pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't wait for Marcus to answer. He shoved the tablet inches from the producer's face, his finger stabbing at the glowing screen. Look at this. You arrogant prick. You see these 4 white streaks? That's not atmosphere, and it's not your goddamn crew. That is a pincer formation. They are moving at 40 miles an hour, and they are less than 200 yards out because your big lights are basically a neon. Eat here sign. Marcus stumbled back, blinking at the thermal feed. I thought those were just heat blooms from the generators. Generators don't have a heartbeat, Marcus. Vance roared, his chest heaving as he stepped right into the producer personal space. They're circling us. They've got the north and west exits blocked. You want to play Ghost Hunter? Congratulations. You found them. Now, tell your people to drop the gear and get in the trucks before I leave you here to be the first course. Marcus stared at the screen, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. But even then, his ego wouldn't let go. He looked from the tablet, back to Vance, his hands shaking as he tried to adjust his designer vest. Okay, look, fine. You've got some big animals out there, Marcus stammered, trying to regain his boss voice. But you can't just come out here, screaming and shutting down a multi-million-dollar production. If this is truly a classified operation, I want to see the paperwork. I want to see a federal warrant or a Department of the Interior clearance. You show me the paper, and we'll talk about moving." Vance let out a laugh that sounded like a dry sob, his eyes wide and manic. "Paperwork? You want a fucking permit to not be eaten?" He shoved the tablet closer, the 4 white ghosts on the screen now, visibly closer, their movements, coordinated and predatory. "Marcus, the things in those woods don't read. They don't care about your lawyers or your rights on public land." Vance turned his head and spat on the ground, then looked Marcus dead in the eye. "I don't have a clipboard for you to sign, you idiot. I have a thermal map. That says you're about 90 seconds away from being a headline in the morning paper. You want paperwork? Call the fucking coroner. They'll have plenty for you to fill out." He stepped back, pointing toward the trucks. "Last chance. Get in the vehicles, or stay here and wait for the feds to find whatever's left of you in the morning. I'm done talking." The cocky mask Marcus had been wearing didn't just slip, it shattered. He looked at the white streaks on the tablet, then at the pitch-black wall of trees just beyond his lights, and, finally, back at Vance's deadly serious face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Jerry! Sarah! Drop it! Drop everything!" Marcus screamed, his voice hitting a frantic, high-pitched register that sent a ripple of panic through his crew. "But the B-cam," Jerry started, clutching the expensive rig. "Leave it," Marcus bellowed, already backpedaling toward the SUV. "Get in the trucks. Now! Move! Move! Move!" The clearing erupted into pure chaos. Sound techs dropped their booms in the dirt, and grips abandoned their light stands as they scrambled for the doors. The hum of generators was drowned out by the sound of heavy boots pounding the earth and the frantic slamming of truck doors. Vance stood his ground, his eyes locked on the tablet as the 4 heat signatures paused at the edge of the light, watching the prey scramble. He keyed his mic, his voice trembling with a mix of adrenaline and rage. "Kelly, they're breaking. The sheep are running. But the wolves, they're just waiting for the lights to go out." The gravel flew like shrapnel as Marcus's SUV led the charge, the engine screaming as he floored it toward a narrow fire road. Behind him, the production trucks lurched and bounced, tires spinning for grip on loose dirt. They didn't even look back at the thousands of dollars in gear, cameras, monitors, and light banks standing lonely and bright in the middle of the woods. I looked over and watched Vance, standing by his armored van. He was, watching the shadows shifting and circling along the tree line. They were in and among the abandoned equipment, like they were spoils of war. "They're clear," Vance panted into his ribs. "The idiots actually made it out. But Kelly, those things aren't leaving. They're sitting right in the middle of our grid now. They've claimed the clearing." Kelly stepped out from the brush 20 yards away, Ashti walking at her side, the dog's hackles still raised like a jagged ridge. She watched the dust settle where the trucks had been. "Let them have the cameras," Kelly said, her voice a low, cold rasp. "Marcus did just exactly what I told him not to do. He rang the dinner bell, and now the whole pack is awake." She looked at the lights, still humming and casting long, distorted shadows into the trees. "Vance, Tell Team A and C to tighten the perimeter until I decide what our next move should be. Those things aren't just curious anymore. They're hunting, and we're the only ones left in the kitchen." "You got it, Kelly," Vance said, as he was already walking away. The silence of the Ozarks was now deafening, until Kelly heard a single branch snap in the distance. Something heavy started moving back into the deep brush. Frustrated, the easy prey had vanished. She said lightly to herself, "We've all witnessed enough here today. Safest bet, head back to base camp." Walking across the grid, Kelly found Vance, her voice a sharp blade in the dark. "Vance, I want every man and dog out of this grid in 5 minutes. Tell the team start heading to Rally Point Bravo. We regroup back at the base. We'll be back at 0500 with the sun at our backs. We aren't fighting on their terms tonight." "Copy that," Vance replied, his fingers already flying across his console. Heading back towards the armored van, Ashti stayed glued to her side, her head swiveling toward the shadows. They weren't finished, Kelly thought. They were just resetting the board. Kelly gripped the steering wheel as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She watches the dark road ahead in her high beams, the trees closing in like a tunnel. Beside her, Ashti is finally still, but the dog's fur is still holding that sharp, wild scent of the woods. Kelly's mind is racing. She thinks about Marcus and how his ego almost cost a dozen lives. But more than that, she's thinking about the dogmen, the way they moved. The pincer formation Vance saw on the screen wasn't animal instinct. It was strategy. They weren't just hungry. They were organized, and now they know we're watching. This was no longer a mission. It was war. She glances at the radio, thinking about Vance back in the van. He's probably staring at the blank monitors, replaying those white heat streaks in his head. They all knew this was coming, but tonight made it real. Pulling into base, Camp Kelly parked her truck and turned the engine off. Soaking up the silence of the cab, she looked over at Ashti. The dog's eyes reflected dim moonlight, steady and waiting for her mum's next move. Kelly began to feel the stress, tightening like a noose around her chest, thinking, if I slip up even a little bit, I'll lose my teams. I'll lose my dogs. She felt the phantom weight of the dogman's gaze from the tree line. She looked at her team in the rear view, Vance rubbing his eyes, and decided to get the dogs taken care of for the night and ready for tomorrow. As she unhooks the trailer and leads the dogs out, the weight of the night feels different under the full moon. She feels the power in Ashti's muscles as the Kangol jumps down to the gravel. These dogs are fast, tactically faster than anything on 4 legs, but they aren't used to something that can drop from a towering 7-foot upright stance down to a 4-legged sprint in a heartbeat. The dogman doesn't just run, it teleports. A shapeshifter in the way he moves, Bigfoot is a massive, upright presence. But the dogman can clear 100 yards on all fours, like a greyhound from hell. That versatility is exactly what's eating at me. Tempting fear, an emotion she made peace with long ago. Tomorrow, it's not about who's stronger, it's about who's faster, and she knows deep in her gut that before the sun sets tomorrow, some of that blood on the forest floor is going to be theirs. She begins watching her team. They're moving with a silent, grim efficiency. They aren't chatting, not talking. They were repacking tactical kits. They're checking the tension on the dog's leashes and recalibrating the sensors, their moves sharp and focused. They weren't just going through the motions of checks they'd done 1,000 times before. They were bouncing back. The air was thick with the realization that they're not just fighting an animal. They're fighting something that breaks the rules of physics. They worked with an eerie silence. The silence spoke volumes. The calm before the storm. She knows the team's heart rates are finally leveling out, but her own is still humming. She knows that tomorrow, when the blood starts to spill, it's going to be because of that speed. They can't just be good. They have to be perfect. You wanted to see if you could handle the Ozarks, she tells herself. The internal voice, cold and stinging. Well, here they are. They move faster than your eyes can track, and they're twice as smart as the idiots you just saved. Hope you're ready to bleed, Kelly, because they're already tasting the air for you. The heavy clicking of the kennel latches echoed in the quiet base camp as Kelly led the dogs one by one into the massive, reinforced runs. These weren't just dog houses. They were a tactical fortress for the pack, designed to keep them safe and rested. As she guided Ashti into her run, Kelly felt the vibration of the dog's muscles. Still tight, still wired. She ran a hand over the Kangol's head, and the internal talk started up again, sharper than before. This isn't like the Bigfoot, she thought, her eyes tracking the dark shadows beyond the camp lights. With the Bigfoot, we were fighting a tank. It was about raw power and staying out of the way of a freight train. But this is a different kind of hell. She thought about the dogman's speed, the way it could drop from 6 feet to 4 in a heartbeat, blurring the lines between man and beast. It was a predator that didn't just hunt with teeth, it hunted with intelligence and a supernatural quickness that made her tactical training feel like it was moving in slow motion. Bigfoot was a war of attrition, she reflected, closing. The final gate. The dogman is a war of split seconds. If you blink, you're dead. If you hesitate, you're a memory. This is going to be a bloodbath, and I'm the one leading the team into the center of it. She stood back, watching the pack settle. They were the best in the business, but they were still flesh and blood. She turned toward the armored van where the lights of the monitors was still glowing. "Vance! Everyone!" she called out, her voice cutting through the silence with a command that left no room for argument. "Shut it down. Now!" Vance looked up from a screen, his eyes bloodshot. "Kelly, I'm still mapping those last thermal pings. I don't care," she snapped, walking toward them. "Tomorrow, we're dealing with something faster and meaner than anything we faced with the Bigfoot. If you aren't sharp, you're bait. I need your heads right. I need you rested. We hit the racks now. That's an order." She watched them start to power down the gear, the blue light fading from their faces. She knew the weight of what was coming. It wasn't a question of if blood would be shed. Tomorrow. It was a question of whose. The sun hadn't even cleared the ridge when the team gathered around the hoods of the trucks, the smell of strong coffee mixing with the damp scent of the Ozark pines. Kelly stood at the center, her face set like stone. Beside her, Eli, the lead for Team A, leaned against the fender, while Vance tapped a stylus against a tablet. "Listen up," Kelly's voice was low, but carried a sharp edge. After last night, the game has changed. We aren't just tracking anymore. We're in a kill zone. These things aren't just fast. They're mimics. If you start shouting commands, they'll be throwing your own voice back at you from the brush before you can reload. Vance stepped forward, holding up one of the heavy, reinforced Kevlar vests. That's why we're going COM 0 for the animals. Every dog is outfitted with the haptic pulse system under the Kevlar. From this point on, you do not speak to your dog. You use the thumps. Eli frowned, inspecting the vest. So, no verbal sit, no stay, no strike. None, Vance confirmed. A series of pronounced thumps on the left rib means left. Flank positioning. 2 thumps on the right means search and hold. A rapid pulse on both sides is the kill command. They've been trained to ignore your voice entirely. If a dogman tries to call them off using your voice, the dogs won't even twitch. Tactically, we're staggering, Eli said, pointing to the map on the hood. Team A takes point. Low and slow. Kelly, you and Team B take the center with the Kangals. Team C brings up the rear with the heavy sensors. We move in a tight diamond. If something moves, don't call it out. You ping the GPS. Suddenly, the radio on Kelly's hip erupted with a burst of static that made everyone jump. Base, to lead. Kelly, do you copy? The voice was frantic, breathless. We just got a 911 relay from a satellite phone in Grid 4. It's a massacre, Kelly. Screams, gunfire, and sounds of something tearing. There are people being slaughtered up there right now. Who the hell is up there? Kelly barked, grabbing the radio. We cleared that grid. It's Marcus, the voice crackled. The idiot went back. He took the crew and some fans from a raffle contest. He wanted authentic night footage since you weren't there to stop him. They're being hunted in real time. Mount up, Kelly yelled, the briefing forgotten in a blur of motion. Eli, Vance, move. We're going in hot. 20 minutes later, the trucks skidded to a halt at the edge of the clearing. The scene was a nightmare. The production lights were still humming, but they were coated in blood. Bodies were scattered like broken dolls across the dirt. The fans who had won a dream trip only to find a living hell. Marcus and 2 others were huddled inside the remains of a smashed catering van. The metal was groaning as something heavy slammed against the side from the outside. Kelly didn't waste a breath. She hit the side of the truck and slid out, her hand immediately finding the haptic remote. She didn't say a word. She tapped the left trigger twice. Under her Kevlar vest, Ashti felt the 2 rhythmic thumps against her ribs. The Kangal didn't bark. She didn't look at Kelly. She simply dropped her head and vanished into the shadows of the left flank. A silent, furry ghost, moving toward the sound of the screaming. Vance, get the thermals up, Kelly signaled silently. Eli, take the right. Use the thumps. Let's show these things how we play in the dark. The metal of the catering van shrieked as a massive, clawed hand peeled the door back, like tinfoil. Inside, Marcus was curled in a ball, his expensive jacket soaked in someone else's blood. Beside him, 2 young fans, contest winners who had looked so excited in their raffle photos, were screaming, their voices raw and high. Vance, lights, blind them. Kelly signaled. her hand working the haptic remote on her belt. The tactical floodlights on the trucks flared to life, cutting through the gore-stained clearing. In the sudden white wash, 3 dogmen were visible, hunched over the van. They were blurring, shifting from 2 legs to 4 with a sickening, liquid speed. "Get up! Run! Now!" Kelly roared as she reached the van. "My crew! They just snatched Jerry!" Marcus blubbered, tripping over a camera cable. Kelly grabbed him by the collar, hauling him out. "If you want to live, you move now." The 2 fans scrambled out behind him, but they were too slow. Before Kelly could even raise her sidearm, a shadow detached itself from the top of the van. It didn't make a sound. It was just a blur of fur and muscle that hit the first fan, a young man in a Beyond the Veil t-shirt, and dragged him into the dark at 40 miles an hour. "No! Help him!" the girl screamed, frozen in terror. "Keep moving!" Kelly yelled, but the air suddenly filled with a voice. "Help him! Help him!" It sounded exactly like the girl. It was coming from the trees 10 feet away. The girl turned toward her own voice, and in that split second of confusion, a dogman standing 7 feet tall stepped out of the mist. Its jaw unhinged, and it was over before the girl could even gasp. "Damn it! Eli, coverage!" Kelly shouted, her thumbs slamming the haptic remote. Under the Kevlar, Ashti felt the rapid fire pulse on her right ribs. Strike, neutralize. The Kangal launched. She didn't bark, didn't growl. She was a 70-pound tactile missile. She hit the dogman just as it reached for Marcus, her massive jaws locking onto his forearm. The creature let out a sound like a grating metal hinge, trying to shake the dog off. But Ashti held. "To the van! Move!" Kelly shoved Marcus toward the armored doors where Vance was waiting. Marcus scrambled inside, his face a mask of pure, shattered horror. Kelly stood at the door, her eyes scanning the tree line where the mimicked voices were starting to multiply. "Shut up and run!" A voice rasped from the dark, her own voice, perfectly pitched. "Help me, Marcus!" Jerry's voice called out, though Kelly knew Jerry was already gone. "There, mocking us!" Eli hissed, his rifle up, his eyes darting. "They're using the noise to pin us down." "Let them talk," Kelly growled, tapping the return command on her remote. Ashti released the creature and faded back into the perimeter, silent as a ghost. "Vance, tell me we've got a clear path out of here. I'm not losing anyone else to a raffle prize." The clearing was a choir of the dead, the dogmen throwing the victims' screams back at the team from every direction. Kelly didn't look at the bodies. She couldn't afford to. In this business, if they're gone, they're collateral damage. "Vance, slam the door! We're burning track!" Kelly shouted, leaping into the back of the armored van as Ashti cleared the threshold in a single, silent bound. "But the equipment, the footage!" Marcus wailed from the floor, clutching his knees. Kelly backhanded him. A sharp, stinging crack that silenced his hysterics. "Shut up, Marcus. Your toys are gone. Your people are gone. If you say one more word about footage, I'm throwing you back out there." She slammed the heavy steel door and threw the deadbolt. "Eli, go! Pedal to the floor!" The engine roared, and the armored van lurched forward, tires screaming as they tore over the blood-soaked gravel. Outside, The sounds of heavy bodies slamming against the reinforced siding echoed through the cabin. Dull, rhythmic thuds of the pack trying to find a way in as the vehicle gained speed. "They're pacing us," Vance said, his eyes glued on the monitors. The thermal streaks were running parallel to the van, blurring through the trees on all fours. "Kelly, they aren't letting go. They're matching us at 50 miles per hour." Kelly didn't look at the screens. She knelt next to Ashti, checking the dog's Kevlar for any punctures. The Kangal was panting, her eyes fixed on the door, her body still vibrating from the strike. "Let them run," Kelly muttered, her voice cold and hollow. "They've had their fun for tonight. They got what they wanted." She looked at Marcus, who was staring at his hands in the dim red light of the cabin. "You wanted authentic, Marcus? You just got it. I hope those ratings were worth the price of admission." The van hit the main road, the thumping against the sides finally fading as the dogmen peeled back into the safety of the deep timber. The silence that followed was suffocating. The drive back to base was a hollow, ringing silence, broken only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt and Marcus's jagged, shallow breathing. No one spoke. There was no "good job" or "we made it." The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and the crushing weight of the people they'd left behind. Kelly stared out the window at the passing shadows, her hand resting on Ashti's head, feeling the dog finally begin to power down. When the van finally skidded to a halt at the command center, the silence was replaced by the strobe of blue and red lights. The authorities were already there. Local sheriffs, forest rangers, and 2 black SUVs that didn't have any markings at all. As soon as the doors hissed open, the fallout hit them like a physical wave. "Kelly, what the hell happened out there?" A ranger sergeant barked, stepping into the red wash of the van's interior lights. "We've got reports of gunfire and screaming. Where's the rest of the crew?" Kelly stepped down, her boots hitting gravel with a heavy thud. She didn't look at the ranger. She looked at the man stepping out of the black SUV, a suit who looked like he'd never seen a tree, a day, in his life. "The crew is gone," Kelly said, her voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Marcus ignored a direct warning and took civilians into a restricted hot zone. It was a massacre. Marcus stumbled out behind her, blinking at the flashlights. "It was... They were so fast," he whispered, his charm completely dissolved. "They took the fans. They just took them." The suit stepped forward, his eyes cold and clinical. "Marcus, you're going to come with us. We have a lot of non-disclosure agreements to discuss regarding classified animal attacks." "And Kelly?" He turned his gaze to her, sharp and accusing. "You were supposed to be the specialist. How did you lose control of the grid?" Kelly felt a surge of white-hot rage, but she kept her face a mask of iron. She looked at Vance and Eli, who were already being pulled aside by investigators. "I told him it was a war zone," Kelly said, stepping right into the suit's personal space. "He decided it was a playground. If you want someone to blame for the blood on those cameras, look at the guy in the designer vest. My team did our job. We brought back the only thing left to save." She turned her back on the bureaucrats and the questions, walking toward the kennel runs with Ashti. She knew this was just the beginning. The paperwork, the lawsuits, and the cover-ups would follow. But the real problem was still out there in the dark, faster and smarter than any of these men could imagine. The air in the base camp was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the distant, rhythmic strobing of emergency lights. Kelly stood by the kennel runs, her hand resting on the cool chain link, watching Ashti finally sleep. The silence was heavy, the kind of silence that only follows a massacre. The crunch of the gravel made her head snap up. Vance was walking toward her, his face pale in the dim moonlight. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring down at the tablet in his hands, his fingers trembling. "Kelly," he whispered, his voice crackling. L was going through the raw. Cash from Drone 4, right before the satellite link got shredded by the signal interference. "I found something." He didn't wait for her to ask. He stepped closer and held out the screen. The footage was grainy, the thermal black and white flickering with static, but the image was unmistakable. "Look at the south edge of the clearing," Vance said, his finger hovering over a cluster of trees. "While we were focused on Marcus and the van, while the pack was hitting the fans, look at what was happening in the background." Kelly leaned in, her eyes narrowing. In the corner of the frame, tucked deep in the shadows where the production lights didn't reach, a heat signature was moving. But it wasn't a dogman. It was tall, upright, and moving with a slow, deliberate grace that was entirely human except for the massive, broad-shouldered frame that was too large for any man. "Is that—" Kelly started, the words dying in her throat. "Yeah, Kelly," Vance said, as the two looked at one another in total disbelief. Vance continued, "The heat signature you are looking at is him, our Bigfoot. So what do you think?" Kelly tried to find her voice, but couldn't. After several long minutes of stunned silence, Kelly finally spoke. "What in the hell is going on?" She was angry, real angry. "Right now, only you and I know, Kelly. This is footage we were never supposed to see." He was right. Vance hit play. In the flickering thermal, the Bigfoot wasn't attacking. He was standing over one of the Beyond the Veil equipment crates, and as they watched, he reached down and picked up one of the high-frequency microphones Marcus had left behind. He didn't smash it. He tucked it into a makeshift strap on his chest, then turned his head and looked directly up at the drone. For a split second, the Bigfoot's eyes flared white-hot in the thermal, as if he knew exactly who was watching him from the sky. Then he simply vanished back into the blackness of the timber. "He's collecting their gear," Vance said, his eyes wide. "The dogmen are the teeth, Kelly. But he's the one learning how to use the tech. They aren't just a pack of animals anymore. They're an army, and we just gave them the ears they need to hear us coming from miles away." Kelly felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. She looked back at the dark Ozark ridges, realizing the fallout from tonight wasn't just the bodies or the lawsuits. "They're evolving, Vance," she whispered, her hand tightening into a fist. "And we're the ones who just gave them the tools to do it. That changes everything. If he's been in military custody, he's not just a wild creature anymore. He's something the government has been poking at. And he's clearly learned a few things while he was locked away." Vance's face was ghost white as he held out the tablet. Kelly, look at the south edge of the clearing. This isn't just some random animal scavenging for food. Kelly leaned in, her eyes narrowing at the grainy thermal. In the deep shadows, far away from the chaos of the dogmen, a massive, upright figure was moving with a slow, mechanical precision. "Is that him?" Kelly whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The one from the military base?" "It has to be," Vance said, his voice trembling. "Look at his movements. He's not just picking things up. He's selecting." On the screen, the Bigfoot, the one that had been captured and hauled off to that classified hangar that is ophically non-existent. He stared at the drone with wild, glowing eyes of a beast. They were cold, calculating eyes. He knows how we communicate. He knows how the GPS grids work. And he's leading those dogmen like a tactical lead, Vance rasped. "Keep it quiet," Kelly said. "No logs, no uploads to the cloud. If the feds or the suit finds out he's back and that he's geared up, this whole mountain will be carpet bombed by morning. We don't report this to anyone." "But Kelly, he's got their tech," Vance whispered, glancing nervously at the black SUVs still idling at the base camp entrance. "He knows how we track." Kelly's eyes shifted to the body bag lying on the gravel in the shadows of the van. "Right now, we have one final piece of business," she said firmly. She didn't wait for the investigators to finish their paperwork. She signaled to Eli, and together they hoisted the heavy, zipped-up remains of one of the fallen. Someone the dogmen had used to send a message. She didn't take the body to the morgue or the temporary triage tents set up by the rangers. She drove the truck back to the very edge of the tree line, far from the flashing lights and the prying eyes of the bureaucrats. She killed the engine and stepped out into the thick, oppressive silence of the Ozarks. With Ashti at her side, her hackles raised but silent, Kelly dragged the bag into the first line of brush. She didn't say a prayer. She didn't leave a note. She simply left the body where she knew he would find it. A grim trade, a peace offering, or perhaps a warning of her own. As Shaish walked back to the truck, she felt a pair of eyes watching her from the deep timber. They weren't the twitchy, hungry eyes of the dogmen. They were steady, heavy, intelligent. She climbed in the cab and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The war had changed. The creatures had the gear, the speed, and the lead. And now she had secrets. "Let's go," she told Eli. "Tomorrow, we start the real hunt." The next morning, the base camp was a hive of controlled, lethal energy. There was no more talk of observation. Kelly stood at the center of the tactical map, her eyes reed-rimmed but sharp. "They have our gear, they have the speed, and they think they have the terrain," Kelly said, her voice like grinding gravel. "But they don't have our discipline. Vance, give me the grid." Vance hit a switch, and a 3D topographic map of the ridge flared to life. "I've pinpointed the signal from the stolen microphone. The Bigfoot is holding position in the Devil's Throat Canyon. The dogmen are clustered around him in a defensive perimeter. They aren't hiding anymore. They're dug in. Eli, take Team A and C. You're the anvil," Kelly commanded. "You hit them from the north with the high-frequency emitters. Disorient them, mess with their ears so they can't hear the haptic thumps. I'll take Team B and the Kangals through the south crevice with a hammer." "And the Bigfoot?" Eli asked, checking the action on his rifle. "He's mine," Kelly said. "He's the brain. You take out the brain, the body dies. The team moved out in total silence. No sirens, no lights. They reached the mouth of the canyon just as the sun hit its peak, casting long, jagged shadows across the rocks. Kelly felt the haptic remote in her hand, her thumb hovering over the strike command. Thump, thump. Under her vest, Ashti tensed. The pack of Kengals moved like a single organism, bellies low to the ground, silver and tan fur blending into the limestone. Suddenly, a dogman dropped from a ledge above Team A, its jaws snapping inches from Eli's helmet. "Now!" Kelly roared into the comms. The canyon erupted. The high-frequency emitters let out a bone-shaking pulse that made the dogmen shriek, clawing at their ears in confusion. The unnatural speed faltered as the sound waves disrupted their inner ears. Team B. Strike! Kelly slammed the haptic remote. The Kangals didn't hesitate. They hit. The dogmen, with the force of heavy machinery, 70 pounds of muscle and Kevlar slamming into the predators. Ashti locked onto the lead dogman's throat, her massive weight pinning it to the canyon floor, while Eli's team moved in with tactical precision, neutralizing the threats one by one. Kelly pushed forward, past the snarling melee, toward the cave at the back of the canyon. There he stood, the big foot. He was wearing the stolen tactical satchel and holding a heavy iron bar like a club. He looked older than she remembered, more scarred, his eyes filled. With a weary, ancient rage, he lunged with a speed that defied his size, the iron bar whistling past Kelly's head. She rolled, coming up with her sidearm, but she didn't fire. She signaled to Vance. "Vance! The pulse! Max output!" A directional acoustic blast hit the cave wall, the vibration bringing down a shower of boulders that pinned the Bigfoot's legs. He roared, a sound that shook the very foundation of the mountain, but he was trapped. Kelly stepped into the light, her weapon leveled at his head. Ashti stood at her side, blood on her muzzle, but eyes fixed on the target. The Bigfoot looked at her, the iron bar dropping from his hand. For a second, the intelligence in his eyes flared, a recognition of a fellow warrior. "You should have stayed in the deep woods," Kelly whispered. She didn't hesitate. The final shots echoed through the devil's throat, followed by a silence so profound it felt like the mountain itself was exhaling. When the smoke cleared, the team stood among the fallen. The pincer was broken. The general was gone. Kelly looked at her team, bruised and bleeding but standing. She looked at Ashti, who leaned her heavy head against Kelly's leg. The Ozarks were quiet again. The secret was safe, and the hunt was finally over. "Vance," Kelly said, holstering her weapon. "Call it in. Tell them the grid is clear. And tell them, if they ever bring another one of these things into my woods, I won't be the one coming to save them." The drive from the Ozarks was a blur of highway lines and cold coffee, but as the high desert heat of California began to hit the windshield, Kelly's grip on the wheel tightened. Shui wasn't heading straight back to her ranch in San Bernardino yet. She had one stop to make, and the cargo in the back of the truck was rotting. She bypassed the main gates, O. Edwards Air Force Base, cutting across the scrub brush toward the unmarked perimeter in Riverside. The secret base, the one where they'd held him, poked him, and tried to turn a legend into a weapon. The guards at the gate leveled their rifles as the mud-caked truck screeched to a halt, but Kelly didn't wait for a clearance. She hopped out of the cab, her face a mask of sun-baked rage. "Call your handler," she roared at the gate camera. "Tell him the dog lady is here to return his property." A moment later, the heavy reinforced gates hissed open. She drove straight to the main hangar, where the suit from the Ozarks was already waiting. He was flanked by 2 armed MPs. He looked nervous, his eyes darting to the back of her truck. "Kelly? You can't." "Be here," he started, his voice thin. "This is a restricted—" "Shut up," Kelly snapped. She walked to the tailgate and slammed it down. With one violent shove, she rolled the heavy black body bag out of the truck. It hit the pristine concrete floor with a wet, heavy thud right at the sweet's feet. The smell of the Ozarks, the pine, the blood, the musk, it all filled the sterile hangar. "There's your general," Kelly said, pointing at the bag. "He learned everything you had to teach him. He learned how to lead. He learned how to use your tech and how to kill with military precision. And then he died in a canyon because you thought you could control something that was never meant to be caged." The suit looked down at the bag, his face turning grey. We need to perform an autopsy. We need the gear back." "The gear is at the bottom of a ravine, smashed into 1,000 pieces," Kelly lied, her eyes boring into his. "And are I ever see another one of your research teams within 100 miles of my ranch or the Ozarks, it won't be a body bag I bring back. It'll be a lawsuit that burns this base to the ground." She climbed back into her truck, Ashti watching the MPs through the rear window with a low, vibrating growl that made them step back. "I'm going home to San Bernardino," Kelly called out as she put the truck in gear. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. The next time the mountain screams, you're on your own." She floored it, the tires screaming on the concrete as she left the base behind in a cloud of desert dust. As she hit the highway toward the ranch, she looked in the rear view. The desert was vast, but for the first time in months, the shadows didn't seem to be chasing her. She was going home. The desert sun was hanging low and heavy over the San Bernardino peaks as Kelly finally pulled through the gates of her ranch. The tires crunched on the familiar gravel, a sound that felt like a long overdue exhale. She killed the engine, and for a full minute she just sat there. The silence wasn't heavy, predatory quiet of the Ozarks. It was the dry, honest heat of home. She didn't care about the suit back at Edwards. She didn't care about Marcus's ruined show, and she didn't care if there was another war brewing in the shadows of the timber. Right now, the war was someone else's problem. She hopped out and dropped the tailgate, letting the pack out. The Kangals didn't wait for a haptic pulse or a command. They hit the dirt running, their tails curling high as they reclaimed their territory, sniffing the familiar fence lines and the desert scrub. Ashti didn't run off, though. She hopped down and stood by Kelly's side, leaning her massive head against Kelly's hip. Kelly reached down and buried her fingers in the dog's thick fur. She felt the steady, calm heartbeat that had been redlining for days. "Yeah, I know," Kelly whispered, looking toward the ranch house. "Me too." She walked toward the back porch, kicking off her dusty tactical boots and leaving them right there on the steps. No gear cleaning tonight, no debriefing, no checking the sensors. She was taking time out. Real time. The kind where the only thing she had to worry about was the sunset and the next meal for her dogs. As she opened the front door, she didn't look back at the road or the distant horizon. She just stepped inside and let the door swing shut, locking out the rest of the world. Damn, it was good to be home.